I hope you're ready, because it's going to be rough.
He busted his ass every day for 12 months.
He had to be successful. He didn't have a lot of choices.
The shadow, Dorian Yates.
Well, Dorian, be the first to reach the upper limit allowed by his genetic potential.
Dorian opened the door up for big beyond belief. Dorian did something different.
I didn't realize how good Dorian Yates was until I went to the 95 Olympia and I saw him in person. I was like, holy shit.
I always felt like I was different.
Going into the 1990s, a new monster was emerging. Nicknamed the Shadow, the Englishman Dorian Yates defied the golden era. His hard, grainy look and unparalleled mass set a new standard for bodybuilding. What had originally started as a hobby in jail had turned into a new look that bodybuilders would follow for decades to come. Even Mike Tyson could do nothing but pay him respect. But everything would have never started if Dorian didn't find his calling in the most unexpected place. The year was 1981 and the England riots were taking place. After his father passed away at the age of just 13, Dorian had been hanging out with the wrong crowd. One night, Dorian went out with his friends to rob some clothing stores. One of his friends undressed the mannequin and thought he could take the outfit easily. But after his friend took the clothes off, the entire mannequin came crashing down, which shattered the window. The sound screeched throughout the streets and alerted the cops. Within 30 seconds, 20 cops were onto them. At the age of just 18, Dorian was sentenced to 6 months in a detention center. He felt extremely disappointed in himself and never wanted to come back again. With the determination to get better, Dorian started hitting the weights. Within weeks, his physique blew up. When officers asked everyone to do a circuit around the sports hall, Dorian finished the circuit so fast that guards asked him to do it again. They didn't believe Dorian actually completed it, but as they watched him do the circuit again, they realized that Dorian was just so much faster than everyone. With no car, no spare money, and no home, Dorian knew he needed to go all in on bodybuilding.
I don't have paperwork from school that would allow me to get a good job or something like that, and then I ended up in a jail, and I know a lot of people that be in and out for the rest of their life. So I could have gone that route or I could have gone the bodybuilding route. And I knew that initial taste of being in that place. I was like, I don't ever want to come back here again.
As soon as he got out of jail, he signed some papers and got some free housing. After scrounging around for jobs, Dorian used his physique to help him land a security job. With the money from his job, he got his own small apartment. At the age of 21, with a stable source of income and housing, Dorian Yates needed to become a pro bodybuilder. He bought all the books in bodybuilding and started reading for hours.
I was reading everything I could get my hands on. Every book on bodybuilding, every book on nutrition, every magazine. No internet, of course, we're talking the early 80s, yeah? So you got to search for your information. You got magazines, yeah? I mean, they're like fucking gold to get these magazines.
Through this, Dorian stumbled on two men that would change his life forever: Arthur Jones and Mike Mentzer. Unlike Arnold Schwarzenegger, who would train for hours every day, Arthur and his team only trained for hours every week with extreme intensity. One of Arthur's greatest mentees was Mike Mentzer, who nearly beat Arnold with high-intensity training. Dorian was skeptical at first, but pulled out his diary. He tried it out and adjusted several variables to see if he could find what was best for him.
So every workout from 1983 to 1997, I got it all logged down. And, you know, train a little bit more frequently, an extra day this week, or, you know, some change there. And I would be able to analyze it. Is this beneficial? Is this not beneficial? And I had the theory of HIT training from Arthur Jones, from Mike Mentzer. So the theory appealed to me because it was logical, and that's the way my brain works. It works in logic and mathematics and straight line.
Within 1 year, Dorian had gained so much mass that he was ready to make his debut at his first bodybuilding show.
I just always felt I'm different from everybody else, and I'm destined for something different. I just always had that like tenacity. If I'm doing something, I just do it.
At the age of 22, Dorian made his debut at the Mr. Birmingham Novice Bodybuilding Competition. He had only trained for bodybuilding for less than a year and hadn't even dieted for the competition. But despite this, his physique blew everyone out of the water. So after taking home the first place trophy, he was invited to compete at the West Coast Novice Championships. For the next 18 months, Dorian learned how to diet and gained even more mass. He thought it would be nice to win and expected a close fight. When he showed up, the the president of the English Federation of Bodybuilders, Ron Davis, was completely shocked. Dorian didn't look like a novice at all. Ron asked him where he came from and why he was in the novice class. Dorian just laughed it off, but Ron insisted that he was the best heavyweight bodybuilder in the country. He told Dorian that he needed to compete in the World Championships the next week. Dorian looked at him puzzled because he knew he wasn't ready.
And these guys were there, these officials, and Ron was there, and they're like, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" I'm like, "I come from Birmingham." "What are you doing in the novice class? You should be in the heavyweights." "No, I'm not good enough for the heavyweights yet." And they're practically laughing at me. So it's not good enough.
He wanted to win, not take 3rd, 4th, or 5th. But Ron kept insisting that Dorian needed to compete on the British team, so Dorian agreed. Representing Britain at the World Championships would be absurd for a novice, let alone someone who trained for 18 months. But there was a problem. Everyone on the British team knew each other except for the newcomer Dorian. Ron asked Dorian to pose in the opening ceremony to represent bodybuilding, and Dorian agreed. But as he posed in the opening ceremony, the rest of the British team was furious. They thought to themselves that he was just a new guy trying to steal the show. Everyone had been training in bodybuilding for over 5 years and Dorian was just a novice. Because of all the stress leading up to the show, Dorian didn't look the same as the previous week. He was announced as the 7th place finisher out of 13 at the show, so Dorian vowed to himself to only compete when he could get 1st place.
I want to do this. It was literally, I have to do this. It was just something inside of me, almost like, this is it. That's my goal.
Dorian's performance at the World Championships showed him that he could aim big, and his next goal was to become the British champion. If he could do this, he would finally set a name for himself in Britain. Dorian wanted to bring forth the most shredded look ever, but this wouldn't come easy. Before the British Championships, he started taking an oral diuretic called diazide. While diazide can lead to a more shredded look, it can cause dangerous levels of dehydration and cramping. At a height of 5'10" and 215 pounds shredded, Dorian looked peeled, but because of diazide, his muscles were cramping throughout the entire show. When Dorian was announced as the winner of his weight class, he was ecstatic, but he knew the contest wasn't done yet. In order for Dorian to win his pro card, he needed to win the overall competition. He had already won his weight class, but there were 4 winners in 4 different weight classes. So to finally become a pro, he needed to beat the other 3 winners. And unfortunately for Dorian, the winner was not him. Dorian was enraged since he thought he deserved the win. He promised himself at the age of 24 that he would come back better than ever.
I remember winning the British Championship in 1986, and there's 2,000 people there screaming and blowing air horns and cheering and getting my picture taken. I'm going to be in the magazines. But I came home and there's no TV crew waiting here for me. There's no fanfare. I'm back to my same block that I was living in. I had no car, no proper furniture.
But amidst the disappointment, the cramps were still there. After Dorian came back home, cramps were plaguing him everywhere. He was terrified and chugged down some water. Dorian learned his lesson to never abuse diuretics. He had planned to come back the next year for the British Championships, but after getting a hip injury, he decided against it. A year after that, he finally returned. This time, Dorian was bigger than ever and his posing had become so much more refined. He took home the win for the overall competition this time and finally won his pro card.
And the winner of the over 90 kilo class British champion,
Now, with his pro card in hand, Dorian was ready to go to America to compete for the first time there. Dorian took the next 2 years to develop his training and body. This time, he needed to bring forth a world-class physique. Using the money that he won from the British Championships, he purchased the gym that he loved working out at, Temple Gym. By now, people in the UK already knew him, but over in the United States, nobody knew who he was.
It was to my advantage that I was in the UK. I was in this little hole in the ground in Birmingham, and nobody saw me all year round. So this guy that you can't see, somehow, it's building like fear up in your mind because you can't see him, you don't know anything about him.
So when he showed up at New York to compete in the Night of Champions, the crowd was ecstatic to see the unknown Englishman. Nobody had seen him before, but they were amazed, so they started chanting his name. But unbeknownst to Dorian, there was someone who looked even better than him, Momo Benaziza.
Dorian Yates versus Muhammad bin Aziza, who was nicknamed the Giant Killer by Joe Weider because he defeated Dorian at the 19 Night of Champions.
Momo ended up being announced as the winner, which left Dorian in disappointment. But Dorian was determined to win. He took a picture of Momo and taped it to his refrigerator. Every time he went to his kitchen to eat, he looked at the picture for motivation. He put his energy into becoming heavier and fuller than Momo. Dorian had won $12,000 for placing second at the Night of Champions. But after he looked at his expenses for the hotel, the flight, and the food, Dorian wasn't left with much money. There was a new opportunity for Dorian to make tons of money though. A new bodybuilding federation was growing at the time called the WBF. It was founded by the founder of the WWE, Vince McMahon, and they wanted Dorian on board. They flew out Dorian to Connecticut and had bodybuilding legend Tom Platz pick him up. With the contract in hand, they offered Dorian $150,000 a year for 2 to 3 years. Dorian had never seen this much money before, so he flew back to the UK and thought about it for a while.
I was living in a council flat there. I had the gym, which was giving me an okay income, like, you know, getting by, but that's it. And then $12,000 from Night of Champions. So here I am, they're offering me, this is a life-changing thing. This is getting out of the council estate and living in a nice house in the suburbs.
If he wanted to be the best, he needed to be in the Mr. Olympia, not take part in a different federation. And even though he could live a comfortable life, Dorian wanted to be an athlete, not an entertainer. So he called his idol Tom Platz and declined the offer. He could have been living in the suburbs by now, but instead, Dorian was making his return back to the Night of Champions. This time around, Momo wasn't there. With unparalleled mass, Dorian took home the first place trophy. His eyes were now set on a much more ambitious goal, the Mr. Olympia.
Welcome to the 1991 Mr. Olympia Bodybuilding Championships.
Dorian Yates from England is pound for pound the only one that could really take it from Lee.
And we'll see if he can do that. So we'll take you inside the Dolphin with the 1991.
Winning the Mr. Olympia almost seemed impossible for Dorian. Not only were smaller, more aesthetic guys winning at the time, but there was already a reigning champion that stood there undefeated, Lee Haney. Lee had won the Mr. Olympia 7 times in a row at this point, and everyone was expecting another easy win. But Dorian had gained a ton of mass in preparation for his first Mr. Olympia.
There's no way, I'm prepared psychologically. I believe in myself, and I'm coming to show everybody what I've done.
At a height of 5'10" and 240 pounds, Dorian had gained 25 pounds of pure muscle in 5 years. When he stood next to Lee on stage, the win wasn't as clear as usual. Dorian heard a rumor that Lee would bully competitors on stage, so he banged his elbow into Lee several times and Lee knuckled him back. At the age of just 29, Dorian placed second to Lee at his Mr. Olympia debut. He was gaining so much momentum that he made Lee retire. But a new challenger was rising, Kevin Levrone. Just like Dorian, Kevin was gaining a ton of mass and Dorian knew it would be a tough fight. Kevin had won at the 1992 Night of Champions just like Dorian, and he was going to be facing against Dorian at the 1992 Mr. Olympia. But little did Kevin know that Dorian's life was about to change forever. While he was working out at Gold's Gym in Venice, California, Dorian spotted a familiar face. It was Mike Mentzer. After placing second at the 1991 Mr. Olympia, Dorian thought he had gotten high-intensity training down to the tooth. But Mike, who had just been released from a mental hospital, told Dorian that he was far from his genetic potential. Mike explained to him that he was simply doing too much volume. Dorian was doing 2 working sets per exercise, and Mike argued that he only needed 1.
I said, look, Dorian, why don't you pride yourself on being radical? Why don't you become the first already super advanced bodybuilder to take a Mr. Olympia physique and take it to the absolute zenith?
Dorian was skeptical at first but asked to get a workout in with Mike. They started with a bicep machine, where after a brief warm-up, Mike put the pin on the full stack. He asked Dorian to spend 3 seconds on the way up for the positive, then pause for 2 seconds at the top, and spend 4 seconds on the way down for the negative. After an entire minute, Dorian did 7 reps, but the set was not done yet. Mike then helped him with the positive and made Dorian work the negative for 2 reps. He then added 25 pounds to the stack and made Dorian hold it at the top for 15 seconds. This single set led to the best bicep growth Dorian had ever seen in his entire life. Dorian took Mike's words to heart and lowered his training volume to 3.5 hours a week. All of the other bodybuilders were scrambling to put on mass, and Dorian knew this was going to be important. As Dorian pumped up for the 1992 Mr. Olympia backstage, he thought to himself that it was bloody cold, and that was terrible for getting pumped up. The Olympia was taking place in an ice hockey stadium, and Dorian questioned if he could be the best, but he asked himself why not. He had nearly spent 10 years on the sport at this point. Dorian ended up finally taking home the first place trophy, with Kevin Levrone placing second to him.
The silver Sandow medal and a check for $50,000. That goes to Kevin Levrone.
Dorian felt like he was on top of the world. Everything he worked for finally came into fruition, but now he needed to defend his title. Dorian met with Mike again, who advised him to cut back on his volume even more, and Mike was right once again. Dorian had packed on 7 to 8 more pounds of muscle in just a year. At a height of 5'10" and 260 pounds shredded, Dorian's physique was unprecedented. He took the victory at the Mr. Olympia again with ease.
And give it to this year's runner-up, Flex Wheeler.
But little did he know that in 1994, everything was about to change. 6 weeks out from the Mr. Olympia, Dorian was doing underhand barbell rows when he heard a tear. His biceps were torn. He asked himself, how was this even possible? He had done this exercise for nearly a decade without any issue. Dorian's first thought was to drop out of the Mr. Olympia. But after meeting with his doctor, he was told that his bicep wasn't completely ruptured. This was great news. Dorian needed to get a game plan ready now. He started doing the math in his head. What if he could just lose to competitors on a couple poses like the front double bicep pose? He could still edge them out for the win with his back and tricep poses.
So I had a torn bicep. Let's say, in theory, every single person in the contest beats me on that pose. They didn't, but let's just say that they did. It wouldn't matter mathematically because I would still win the majority of the other poses. Nobody could beat me on a front lat spread. Nobody could beat me on a back lat spread. Nobody could beat me on a back double bicep and a side tricep.
So Dorian kept training the rest of his body as usual. When he woke up on the day of the 1994 Mr. Olympia, he felt extremely bloated. Competitors like Sean Ray and Kevin Levrone were looking the best they had ever looked. They completely destroyed him from the front, aside from the front lat pose, which Dorian is known for. But when they turned around, it was no competition. Dorian dominated from the back with his thickness. Some thought Sean Ray deserved the win, but Dorian still took home the trophy.
These awards will be given to competitor number 7, Sean Ray.
He wasn't as good or as sharp as he was in 93 or 95, so I don't believe Dorian Yates at 80 or 90% or whatever you want to call this is good enough to beat Sean Ray at basically 100%.
Dorian knew it was a narrow victory and trained hard to bring back his mass. With unprecedented momentum, in 1995, Dorian beat Kevin Levrone again.
And that award goes to competitor number 18, Kevin Levrone.
Then, in 1996, he beat Sean Ray again.
$50,000. За второе место вручаются Шону Рэю.
At this point, Dorian had won 5 Mr. Olympias in a row and was expecting an easy victory. But little did he know that he would have to fight to death. 3 weeks out from the 1997 Mr. Olympia, Dorian was doing a tricep pullover and press when he heard a bang in his left arm. The sound was so loud that people could have heard it from the other side of the gym. Dorian immediately knew that his triceps were torn. He told himself that he would never win the Mr. Olympia again. 36 hours later, his whole arm swelled up and his tricep looked distorted. Over 90% of his tendon was detached. Dorian felt like somebody was testing him. He took the same attitude that he had with his bicep tear and applied it with his new tricep tear. He flew out to New York and got surgeons to reattach his triceps. But even after the surgery, the strength and shape of his triceps simply wasn't the same. For the next 3 weeks, Dorian quit all pressing movements and went light on pulling movements. He didn't even practice his posing routine because he knew it would stress his triceps. After covering his triceps with a dark spray tan, Dorian saw that one of his competitors was looking at his best. It was Nasser El Somebody. Nicknamed the Professor, Nasser was a genius bodybuilder who spoke 7 languages and had 3 careers. Through his science-based training, he had gained a ton of mass and now stood at a height of 5'11" and 275 pounds shredded. As Dorian posed next to Nasser, his tricep was holding on for its life. He tried not to bang elbows with other bodybuilders because his triceps would have literally detached. After a close competition with Nasser, Dorian barely edged him out and took home the victory. Even to this day, Dorian's win against Nasser still remains controversial. Many, if not most, bodybuilding fans think that Nasser deserved the win.
On that day, I was a huge Dorian Yates fan. I was also a huge fan of Nasser's physique, and I just said, you know what? Nasser did it. He really beat Dorian today, and I think we witnessed something historic. And I said, we'll probably be talking about this for 20 years to come. And look at this, 20 years later, we're still talking about it.
But Dorian planned to return in 1998 better than ever. In the summer of 1998, Dorian tried training hard again, but something felt off. He couldn't train with full capacity because of his triceps, so he decided to withdraw from the Mr. Olympia. Then, as he was aiming to return in 1999, he realized that he would never regain the full power of his triceps. Dorian officially retired and never appeared on stage again. Despite his setbacks, Dorian pioneered the mass monster era and paved the way for modern bodybuilding. A new standard was set because of Dorian. This new standard created legends like Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler, who took the reign after Dorian's retirement. Bodybuilding, especially in the open division, has become more about mass than symmetry because of Dorian. Thank you guys for watching. I'm getting into long form videos and I would really appreciate your feedback. Like, mentor, pump cover.